Anthony, let me just start off with your question from last week. I don't know if anybody else has found anything more, which was actually Mervyn will be interested in it, was also inquiring about this. It's very clear from the Shulchan Aruch that if you are certain, the question is whether, the certainty, is the child, is it, a full-term baby or not? So the idea is you'd wait for 30 days to see whether it would survive. However, if the child sadly dies at 30 days and you know for sure, that's very clear in the Shulchan Aruch, that you know for sure that in fact it is a full-term baby, then sadly Avedus would apply. Now, although Mark, you were saying that in all instances, when the child's 30 days, I'm not sure whether you'd have a full Levi. It looks like that would be a lower key. But as far as Avedus was concerned, what does the United Synagogue normally tell people at 30 days? Do you know?
From
you may not know that.
Or before 30 days?
No, I'd say just at 30 days.
30 days, as if it's 30 days, it's as if it would a person die at any age, and then you have normal.
And prior to that, if you knew for sure,
if it was less than 30 days, at the moment they take the baby, they would bury it without. Nowadays the parents know, but they used to take the baby and bury it without the parents knowing where.
I understand it, but what would they do about Avedus itself?
From what I understand, there wasn't Avedus.
There would be no Avedus. It's in Shulchan Aruch. It's very clear.
But they do have here. There's lots of arguments. Some people do keep it low.
Oh, I see. Oh, fair enough. Because that's Anthony's point, and based on our Gemara as well, that the Shulchan Aruch is very clear that in that the first, even less than 30 days, if you knew for sure, and of course now, Anthony, absolutely, one could tell if it was a full-term baby, then the halacha is misablim olav. There will be a normal din of avelus. Again, I suppose it would depend who you're asking, but that's very clear in the Shulchan Aruch, Siman Shin Ayin Daled, and then we see that in the Aruch HaShulchan too. It's very clear. It doesn't matter, even if much less than 30 days. Sadly, there would be still full avelus. So again, nowadays, I suppose this halacha may be rather different.
Norman.
Yeah.
I think there's two points. First of all, is there a distinction made between a child who's born with obvious congenital anomalies, abnormalities, and is not destined to, which is not, equitable with survival, or there can be also a child who's born healthy but acquires, serious infection or, meningitis or some sort of serious infection, perhaps during the first 30 days, and perhaps dies a few days after contracting that, so would also be dead before 30 days. So
in that, it seems to be what we're concerned about is at birth. Is it a full-term birth? In other words, let's say the baby's born, everything's looking good. Of course, subsequently, if sadly the baby contracts something, but at birth that was a full-term baby, and therefore the halacha is very clear. If you knew for sure it was a full-term baby, even at day one, and then subsequently, say, contract something, that according to halacha, that will be a full din of avelus. So there you are.
Is that it is full term exactly 9 months now, because clearly babies at 36 weeks, and even much less, are
it means a full term. You're right, quite right. Viable Be'asbud will be less. The halacha seems to say that in other words, once you've had a full term, and therefore there's no, of course, prior to that, there are many babies that do survive, and especially now with medicine, they can survive, but they're not considered a chai unless they have they're born with a full term behind them. Then they are considered at birth a chai, and therefore the full avelus sadly would apply.
Well, sorry, Norman. I guess the interesting thing is that the Shulchan Aruch felt that must have felt that he was able to judge when a baby is full term.
Yes.
So that would be information less than the information we would have nowadays, such as ultrasound scans or...
Absolutely. It may well be possible if, for example, we know for sure the couple were together, etc., and suddenly the husband disappeared or went off somewhere, or in fact, we find actually the source of this, that a full-term baby is, at full term, is considered a birth, is with the story of Boaz. And the pasuk there says, "Where's there would heroyon," and the Gemara learns from that Gemara. Actually, it's in Niddah that in the case of Boaz, it's mentioned that sadly Boaz, he was an old man at the time, he passed away the next day, and nevertheless she had this baby, and that from there that's an example where we knew for sure. You know, you talk about a full-term baby, you knew the date, but of course, no ultrasound or anything like that.
What's
so
the
that's
source?
an example.
The Boaz died morning after?
I'm sorry?
Hello? What's the source? What's the source you said that Boaz died
Oh, it is mentioned. Yeah, I mean, I think they're midrashim about that. Yeah.
Sorry,
So
it's unusual that Mervyn is asking about a guddater and somebody else is asking about...
well, yeah, must be Benafachu.
It just piqued my interest, that particular point. Never mind.
Okay, but anyway, no, all I'm saying, Anthony, you're right. If you were sure, in whichever way you happen to know, then it seems to be clear from there. If it's a full-term birth, then Avelis would apply. So that's that point.
Does this judgment of Chayas apply, for example, in criminal law, if somebody kills a baby, if
yes,
a baby, that presumably the baby, if it didn't would last a full term, would not be considered murder?
Correct. That would be, yeah. You wouldn't be. The sophic would be that it's not viable. That the child would not have survived, and therefore it's not full chiyus, if you see what I mean. Yeah, absolutely. It's got ramifications all over.
That's probably taking it a bit far, isn't it? If you kill a baby and a 3-day-old baby, heaven forbid, that would be murder, wouldn't it? I mean,
an abortion.
You haven't. That you killing it doesn't make it unviable.
No, that's true. No. But so what we're saying is, if it was at full-term baby, that is considered at birth a full human being, and therefore with all the halachas of a human, avelus or whatever comes from that.
If somebody performed an abortion on a baby that is pretty close but not at full term, in halacha that would not be considered murder. Correct.
We're talking here where the baby's born.
Yeah, but I mean,
although only a few days old, you don't really know yet. But yes, you might know if you do know that in fact it was a full-term birth. That baby would have a din of a chai.
Yeah, but nowadays, babies are, as we said before, they're very viable well before term, and literally a day before term, that would not be considered a chai.
Correct, because you can have. I mean, you're right. You may consider it in, medically, but in the halach, it's very clear it has to go through a full term to give it this din of chiyus.
But there's a difference between the baby that's still in the mother's womb and the baby.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, that's a massive.
Absolutely.
Massive
prior to birth, then I think everybody's agreed that is not considered, even though you may say it's even gone beyond the due date.
And in that situation, there's the inyanim of roidef, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got a big, absolutely. So there's no.
I mean, interestingly, James Watson, Nobel Prize winner, is reputed to have said that he believes that we should delay viability until day 3 of life. So if there were unsuitable humans being born, we could gently dispatch them.
Oh, right, okay.
Crickle Watson had some very weird ideas generally.
Okay, well, that's
a bit of a
no mention of that in halacha, I'm pleased to say. Okay, and we go. Thank you very much.
The main point about the Crick and Watson is it shows that when people stray outside their field of expertise, it's one thing to cover DNA, but and I have to say, Norman, unfortunately, it happens sometimes with in the yeshiva world as people who are halakhic experts stray outside the They're
Oh
field-
no, no, absolutely, no. You're absolutely right. One of the rules you do find with the real Rabbonim, that they are working hand in hand with the medical experts. They do work together. That's absolutely crucial, and that everybody should know their own boundaries and their own their expertise. Absolutely, both ways round. The doctors on the halacha side, they do need to work with the rabbis.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Believe me, I don't paskin any halacha. You don't have to worry about that.
Well, no, somebody like yourself who's got the the credentials on the rabbinic side as well, that'll be fine.
Seriously.
Right, I think we'll move along.
Mervyn's-
I think we'll move along. I think we're at the Daf Zion Omid Aleph, gentlemen.
What did you say, Anthony? Sorry.
You spent too much time on a gadata. You've neglected the halacha, I'm afraid.
Oh dear. Good. Say hello to a few more people who've joined us. We've got Sam with us, Sammy as well, a few others. Good, doing nicely. Let's pick this up here.
Peter, you're going to mute everybody.
Yes, that's probably a good idea. But please unmute wherever you feel you'd like to say something. Right, on we go. Daf Zion Omid Aleph, right at the top. We made a start of this last week, and let's continue on. Tana Rabbanon. We've got a brisa here, right at the top, third line down, Daf Zion Omid Aleph. Hopefully everybody's got the Gemara. If not, of course, it was attached to the email. Be'echad b'Nisan, we had a couple of things mentioned in the Mishnah about the first of Nisan being the Rosh Hashanah 4. We spoke about Regalim, we spoke about Kings, Baal Ta'acher. We're moving away from that. There's a few other examples here that are mentioned in the Brisa, and the Gemara finally, not quite for today, will ask why they're not actually mentioned in the Mishnah, but they're as an adjunct appearing in the Brisa. Be'echad b'Nisan is Rosh Hashanah l'Chadoshim for months. Of course, it's crucial we know which is the start month. If we said the first month of the year, or Rosh Hashanah is in the 7th month of the year, you need to know where you're starting from. Is Rosh Hashanah in the middle of the winter? Depends how you count the months. So you do need to know which is the first month. Even if you call, as we say, Pesach, the first month, when did Pesach happen? And we'll get to all of this, you see. So you understand, it's all going to be linked to Pesach, but when did Pesach happen? And people may say, well, we've just had Pesach, haven't we, in Shavuos? So we take certain things for granted, but we do need proofs for things. And here it is. So the Gemara said the first of Nisan, Rosh Hashanah for months, and for Ibor, and remember Rashi said, we brought that last week, that we think it's for the Bezdin deciding. They have actually got right up to that last opportunity, which is the very first of Nisan, to decide whether that year will be intercalated. In other words, there will be an Odeh Sheni. So you can't plan, you can't say that it's only up to, for example, Rosh Hashanah, that they can then decide whether there will be a leap year or not that year. No, they've actually got much longer, which is tricky because it means right up to the first of Nisan, you don't yet know whether that Nisan will be Adar Sheni. So if you're planning your holidays off to Eretz Yisrael, that could be tricky, especially if you want to book the plane ticket, because you may find you've booked the month too early. Very nice, you'll be there for Purim, but in fact you won't be there for Pesach. So you've got, now of course we have the calendar, but if there's no calendar, if we will go back to deciding, again, the Rabbonim will decide, again, the same point that Mervyn made before, of course it will be together with, unless they had the expertise to know what's happening in, climates, etc., growth, agriculturally, is it worth having an extra month that year? That will be a decision they could make, but that decision can be made right up to the first of Nisan, and that's what this brisa means. And then the last one mentioned in that brisa, fourth line down, is Trumas Shkolim, which means lifting up the Shkolim, which meant all the korbanos from the Rosh Chodesh Nisan, including Rosh Chodesh Nisan. That would be the communal offerings, which would be, for example, the Talmud or Musaf. All those offerings would come from the new coins, the new Shkolim, which you've collected. We have that Pasha Shkolim to remind us of that. It's from the newly collected half shekel, which collected every year from every individual, nothing, no more, no less. It's half a shekel from everybody, every man, and that half shekel would be collected. And at the first of Nisan, that money would be used, the old money. Sylvain, good to see you. The new money would be used for the korbanos. The old money would be used for other things. It was all collected in various containers, and that would then be used. The money that wasn't used that year would be used for other things. Is that okay? So that's the half shekel. More about this on future dapim. And there's one final one, which is Yesh Omrim. Some people say that the first of Nisan, and not just those three things, there's something else as well, and that's for the people into the in the property business and renting properties and leasing, etc. After this Chirus Botim, even for renting property, if you had in the documentation, good for the lawyers here, if you had in the documentation, it's for this year, the year then goes up to Nisan. It does not go up to the 1st of Tishri. We'll have to see about that, why, what the reason is. And as Rashi said, that's only if you say this year. So if, for example, Hanukkah time, you say that I'm renting the property for this year, the year, according to the Yesh Omrim, goes up to the 1st of Nisan. Of course, if you stipulated a date, or if you said for a full year, then of course you do mean 12 months. But if you just said for this year means in the, say in the property business, but more about that later on in the Gemara. So those are three examples, plus a Yesh Omrim, a fourth one, which some people say is also the 1st of Nisan. Okay, back now to our Gemara, fourth line down. Says the Gemara, L'chodoshim minolon. Where do we know this? Minolon is always a proof from the Torah. Well, of course, we will need a proof from the Torah. The what? The first month of the year is Nisan. Now, I know we always call Nisan Iyar Sivan Tammuz, and I say you'd ask wherever you went into schools and chadorim, the children name the months of the year. You'd say Nisan Iyar. That's very nice. But how do we know? I've got Nisan Iyar Sivan Tammuz. How do you know when Nisan actually is? Which month is Nisan? If you see what I mean, or not. When do you start that? Is the starting in the middle of the winter? Is the starting in the summer? Is the starting at spring? When you talk about the first month of the year, where do you make that first month? So this is really very much talking about even Yetzias Mitzrayim. How do we know that actually was in what we would call Nisan, which means springtime? But look at this. It says the Gemara D'chsiv, HaChodesh hazeh lochem Rosh Chodoshim. This month will be the first month. Fine. Rishon, I'm continuing the Gemara. Rishon hu lochem l'chodshei hashana. This is the first month, Rishon hu lochem, for all the months of the year. So this month, Moshe is being told, just prior to Yetzias Mitzrayim, that month is going to, from now on, be called the first month. And we can understand why, as mentioned in the Ramban, beautiful Ramban, always count from the Yetzias Mitzrayim, that will be called the first month. And that will be a memory of says the Ramban, Nachmanides, if you on that pasuk itself, to remind us as zikaron b'neis hagadol. Ki b'chol eis shenazke hachadoshim. Whenever we mention the months, third month of the year, even if we talk about Rosh Hashanah, we mention it's in the 7th month of the year, which reminds us once again that the first month of the year is, of course, Nisan, and that will be a reminder of the Nes Hanizka. And therefore, in the Torah, you do not find any names given. The Torah always talks about first, second, third, fourth, because we want the first to be the month of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Okay? So what have we got so far? We've got that the first month is the month that they left Mitzrayim. That's fine. And then we carry on. Says the Gemara, Dabru el kol adas Yisrael. Have you got it? 3, 4, 7 lines down. Lemos saying, Be'osol HaChodesh Hazeh, in the 10th of this month, yeah, V'yikhu lohem, you should take for yourselves, Sel leveis avois, sel avois, this lamb for each household, for each, the beis avois, which means for the house of the family, of the fathers, one for one home. V'hoyo lochem lemishmeres, you keep it under guard, ad arbo osolo lechodesh hazeh, and then what will happen? V'shochatu oisoi, then you will shech this animal. That at month, when this happens, and you can see the link there, that month of Yetzias Mitzrayim will be the month that you will call month number 1. Okay, that's all very well. But who actually said the Yetzias Mitzrayim was in the springtime? Maybe it was in the summer, in winter. Do you understand? All very well, let's call it number 1, but which month is it? Continue the Gemara. The Pasuk says, Shomar es chodesh ha'aviv. When it's talking about every year, yearly, you'll be looking and keeping and guarding your Pesach, Yom Tov of Pesach. It should be in the spring month. Eizehu chodesh, which is the chodesh? Sheyesh bo aviv, that's called springtime. Havi omer zeh Nisan. This is what we call Nisan, is that month, the month of spring. Have a look at Rashi. Why? What's Aviv got to do with spring? Rashi actually says in the Torah, the word Aviv, of course, the first 2 letters, word of, meaning father. Father meaning it's the father, it's right at the beginning, meaning the father figure. Have a look at Rashi in our Gemara. Sheyesh bo Aviv. What's it mean? It's a spring. Shahatavua bakira. It's ripening. That's the point. This ripening means the father figure. It means it's the ripening. It's the first fruits from the word bikurim too. The first fruit, when the beginning of the ripening of the produce comes, lios muvusheles. It doesn't mean it's being cooked, but it means it's being ripened. Bigmar bishula. The end of its ripening takes place. And that month actually is the month of Nisan. So what we call Nisan, in other words, it's the spring month. That is the first month. Says the Gemara, I'm still not happy with this. Wonderful. Typical, really, as I say, a lawyer would appreciate this, that here was saying, I'm still not absolutely certain that the spring month you're calling Nisan. Why do you call it what we call Nisan? Why do you call it that the first month? Have a look at the Gemara here. Have you got the beginning line which says Zeh Nisan? V'kori le Rishon, and it's called what we call Nisan, which is in the spring. That is called the first month, right? Let me just stop here for a minute and mention something which is very interesting. We always call these months Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, etc. We know by now that Nisan is in the springtime. Yeah. The names of Nisan, Iyar, Sivan you do not find mentioned in the Torah, which is fascinating. Why not? There's again that same Ramban, worth looking at if you get a chance, in the beginning of chapter 12 in Shemos. Beautiful Ramban. The end of that, it's chapter 12, the very first posuk actually, on Achodesh Hazeh Lochem Rosh Chodoshim. The Ramban says the following. Ukva hiskiru Rabbeinu, our rabbis already mentioned. Ho'inyan, v'omru shemos hachadoshim. Where do these names come from? This name Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz. Where are those names from? The Torah only says first month, second month, 7th month. Those names of months, Olu imonu bi Bovel. They came with us when we left Bovel. Of course, there was the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, and 70 years later, starting building the second Beis Hamikdash. And people are then moving and leaving Bovel, because they were in Bovel, and now they're coming out of Bovel and going on Aliyah back to Eretz Yisrael. We've never had names. And says the Ramban, because as we just explained earlier, the point was to mention number one. Whenever you mention a month, you say it's the second month, the third month, the eighth month, you're always reminding yourself, hopefully, that the first month is Nisan, a reminder of Yetzias Mitzrayim. That's all very well before they went into Golus, before they went into exile, after the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash. However, there's another posuk, and this posuk quoted in Yirmiyahu, and he said, the time will come, you won't talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim, ki im chai Hashem asher helo v'asher hevi es b'nei Yisrael me'eretz tzofa. In here, according to this pshat, we're learning it means coming from Bovel. We'll be reminded there'll be another exodus, not just the exodus from Mitzrayim, there'll be an exodus from Bovel. And of course, we also interpret that to mean an ultimate exodus. We're talking about now, the exile coming to Eretz Yisrael. But in particular, here we're talking about the exile that they went into with the Churban Beis HaMikdash, the first one, and then they left Bovel. And the Pasuk says, you will then refer to the months, you'll refer to things, mentioning leaving Bovel. Lik'ah, what does that mean? Listen to this. Likro hachadoshim b'shem shenikroim be'eretz Bovel. The names that they are called in Bovel. Lahazkir, to remind us, Kishom Omadnu, that's where we stayed. Umishom He'elonu Hashem Yisparach. And that's where he took us up from, because these names, says Ramban, Nisan, Iyar, Vizulos, and the rest too, are Shemos Prosoim. They're Persian names. V'lo yimtzu, you don't find those, only not in the Torah. You'll find the mentions in the Nevi'im, when you're talking about the times of when they were in Bovel, or Megillas Esther, of course, which is also a time, remember, when they were still in Bovel, it was just in between, like the end of that time period, if you remember, when we learned Megillas Esther. We'll get to that later on in the Gemara, and you do find some quotes in the Nevi'im. We'll also find it in Megillas Esther. Okay, and he says actually the time of the Ramban I didn't check. Perhaps I should have done, but the Ramban writes then his time in Persia and Modai, they still call them those names in the time of the Ramban, 1200s. We're still calling the names Nisan. They still got these names, Iyar, Sivan, yeah? Okay, right. Back to our Gemara. So our Gemara's got the following problem. It's all very well to say at Yetzias Mitzrayim, this month, see the moon, the new moon? This month will be the first of all the months. Yeah? Says the Gemara, but how do I know when in the year that was? So the Gemara said, no. That first month, Pesach, is in the spring. And the spring is Nisan, things ripening. Says the Gemara, I'm not happy with that. Why not? Back to our Gemara. Said the beginning of the line is Zer Nisan. Okay, have you got Zer Nisan, the beginning of the line of Gemara, of Zayin Amud Aleph? Says the Gemara, Va'ema Iyar. There's still some crops which are still growing and haven't actually ripened yet in the month of Iyar, what we call Iyar now. In other words, not the first month, what we would call the first month. The second month is the first month of the year. If you hope I'm confusing people here, what we call Iyar really should be the first month, because it's Iyar is where there are still crops which are ripening. Says the Gemara, Ve'eme'ir, Bo'ino Oviv Veleka. We want this to be a month. The Pasuk says, Shoma es Chodesh HaOviv. And Iyar is not really the month of ripening. Have a look at Rashi here. Sheyesh bo Oviv. This we want. Bo'ino Oviv, have you got it? Bo'ino Oviv Veleka in the Rashi. Shekava Nigbara Minisan. Most of the crops are already developed, ripe, innocent. Ve'ika Zara Afela, and if you do find some crops which are late in developing, Ein Ze Bakir and Ofel, that's not considered the first, the ripening of the produce. That's called Ofil. Remember, remember that loshon that comes up in Shemos? They are late. It's late. That's not the real time for the ripening of the crops. That should have been in Nisan. Clearly, the Gemara knows about the crops and the growth of the crops. There may be some latecomers. There may be some crops which are still ripening in Iyar, but that's not really the month. The month is Nisan. Says the Gemara, okay, I've got another question then. Beginning of the line is Ovid, back to the Gemara. Va'ema Adar. Maybe the first month of the year should really be what we now call Adar. Yeah, that's the first month of the year. Why? Because you do have some very early ripening that already takes place in Adar. So maybe we've miscalculated. The first month of the year is really what we call Adar now. With me? That should be the first month. And Pesach should really be in what we call Adar. With me? The Ema Adar, says the Gemara, Bo'ino Rov Oviv Veleka. What does it mean you need Rov Oviv? Have a look at Rashi. The Ema Adar, maybe this is Adar. De'ika Zara Harpa. From the Charif, sharp and quick. Hamisbaker me'ada. So what the Gemara is saying here, there are some crops which are sharp. That's the word Charif, or Churpa, very quick. So there are some crops which are very quick in ripening, and they've already ripened in Adar. In which case, maybe the first month of the year should not be what we call Nisan, but it really should be Adar. With me? Says the Gemara, and now Rashi explains, we need Rov Oviv. Shehu Rov Tavuos Misbakris. It's all very well to have some which ripen in Adar. We've got some which ripen actually in Iyar. But the bulk of them apply and therefore ripen in the month of Nisan. And therefore that is what's called Chodesh HaOviv. Says the Gemara, I'm not happy with that. I'm sorry. Says the Gemara, no. Have you got the beginning line, Veleka? 15 lines down or so. Veleka. Says the Gemara, Midi Rov Oviv Ksiv. The Pasuk says, Shomar es Chodesh HaOviv. Keep the month of which is ripening fruit, ripening grain. 1 minute. So we've just said some things ripen in Adar. Maybe that's what the Torah means. How do you know? Because it says Chodesh HaOviv, it doesn't mean when it actually starts to ripen. And the starting of the ripening, that takes place already in Adar. Are you with me? So the Gemara's question here is, the Pasuk says that Nisan, or what we call Nisan, is the first month. Why? Because that's Chodesh HaOviv. Says the Gemara, what about Adar? The Gemara says no, because that's not when the most of the things, most of the crops aren't actually ripening then. They're ripening in Nisan. Says the Gemara back, but I'm sorry, the Pasuk doesn't say Rov. It says Chodesh HaOviv. Maybe the Torah actually means when things start to ripen, and maybe indeed Adar should be the first month. Are you with me?
No, Matt.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what happened in the years when there are two Adar 2? There could be the majority of the crop then in Adar 2?
Like, absolutely right. So in fact, that's a very good point. If people were, and nowadays, of course, we have the luach, and therefore it's pretty clear what's going on. But you're right, it would be up to, again, the rabbis, together with, if they felt they need some experts on the agriculture, etc., they would have to look around to it. And that's why you're quite right, coming back to that previous point, when we said that they actually, up to the end of Adar, they can still intercalate and make another shaining. If they felt, based on this, quite right, I'm sorry, we have not got the majority of things the majority of the crops starting to grow. It's really, we've had a pretty rough winter. We therefore will have to delay Nisan, because Nisan must be in Chodesh Aviv. But you're right. The Posuk itself, in the end, we will conclude that it's got to be in the Chodesh Nisan. But at the moment, all we've got is it said it should be Chodesh Ha'aviv. Yeah? Pesach must be in Chodesh Ha'aviv, and the conclusion will be, quite right, as we know, that it is Nisan. And it is the time where the majority of the crops are ripening. You may have some early in Adar. That's not what we want. We want Nisan to be the month where the majority of the crops grow. That is the conclusion. But at this point in the argument, the Gemara says, I'm sorry, the Pasuk says Chodesh Ha'aviv. Who told you, rabbis, that the word Aviv here means when the majority, if he would have said Chodesh Rov Ha'aviv, it just says Chodesh Aviv, the month where the crops are ripening, or they're ripened. But maybe that means when it's beginning, you've got the first crops which have ripened, in which case it should be Adar. Therefore, the Gemara at this point is going to have to leave this proof. In the end, of course, we do know the Pesach is in Nisan. But at this point, the Gemara said, I'm sorry, that proof from the Torah is not good enough. Why is it not good enough? Because I don't know whether this word, when it says Chodesh Ha'aviv, it actually means Nisan, or it might actually mean Adar on its own. Unless you can bring me a proof that when the Torah says Chodesh Ha'aviv or Chodesh Harishon, it means Nisan, I'm sorry, I cannot accept this. I need some type of proof from somewhere. You with me? Says the Gemara.
What was it? I didn't understand the answer to Lauren's question. Answer the question. If it's Adar Sheni. So
Laurent's asking, what would happen if there would be an Adar Sheni?
I understood that. What's the answer?
The answer is, you're right. That would be a very good reason why they would have to intercalate and make another Sheni. If the crops were not growing in Adar, they would have to make an extra month. Because in the end, we do know what the conclusion is going to be, having just gone through Pesach and Shavuos, etc.
But if they are growing in Adar Sheni,
I'm sorry?
Yeah, but what about the reverse? If they were growing in Adar Sheni, because
well, no, they wouldn't have made another Sheni. No. They would then say, I'm sorry, we're not having, I'm presuming just before Adar, if they can see things growing already in Adar, you're back to Mervin's point about making sure they've got the right experts there. In the first Adar, they would bring the experts in to say, what do you say? Are things growing or not?
I thought they set it in territory.
It was to go to the previous comments.
First Adar,
but
then they would make it they would not make an extra month if they felt by looking at the crops things.
Hello.
You've got to unmute. Peter,
Hello?
you need to unmute Norman.
Seems to have lost everybody.
Yeah, we've got you now.
Are we all back?
Yeah, we got you back.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
We can hear you, but you froze. There's trouble with your internet at home. But carry on, Norman. We can now hear you.
And see you.
Okay, fine. Okay, so yeah, back to Laurent's question. That would be up to the people, I say, with the experts to decide whether they need that extra month. But Yeah, what's the question? Yeah.
Was to go back to the previous comment where they say the majority of the crop. So maybe if it is Adar Sheni, there will be more the majority of the crop in Adar Sheni. So that could match the definition.
No, so you're right. So what would happen in Adar, before you got to the Adar Sheni, they would have to make an assessment. And if they felt the majority of the crops were actually going to come in Adar Sheni, they said, we're not having an Adar Sheni. Sorry, we're skipping it. I know our Luach said that this year is meant to have an Adar Sheni. They would say, sorry, we're not going to have that Adar Sheni because we're already well into spring. We don't need that Adar Sheni. We'll go straight into Nisan.
Oh, you mean they set
I know
there?
it may you know, people. So, I'm sorry, even what?
They'd set it then and there, you mean? I thought they set it from Tishri where there's going to be a leap year or
No, that's very quite right. That's what we're saying here. According to this, they'd have to bring the experts in, and we've got up to the end of Adar to decide whether there'll be an extra month. Okay. So that's exactly what we're seeing in the Yesh Omrim. You've got until, again, you've got to bring the experts in and know what you're doing. It's if they made a mistake, they're allowed to do that. In other words, again, if they've made a decision and calling this Adar Sheni, it would remain Adar Sheni. But the aim would be to have the majority of the crops ripening in Nisan. And they would be thinking about that, you're right, from Tishri, maybe even in the summer, saying to themselves, I think this year we need the Adar Sheni, or we don't, because we want the majority of the crops to appear in or ripen in Nisan. But our Gemara is saying,
in practical terms, you need to have seen something starting.
Yes.
Or you can say, actually, the next month is going to be Nisan, or is going to be the first month. So right. Otherwise, it's a bit like with Rosh Chodesh if you haven't seen anything. So if there had been 1st of Adar, nothing has grown. You may not know until midway through Adar that you're going to start getting growth, and you can't in hindsight. So it may be the first thing that you see is on the 16th of that month, and you can't, in retrospect, say, "Oh, this should have been Nisan." So you need to have.
No, don't forget it's the majority. You've already told me it's already the 15th. If it's the 15th of Adar, you've already lost 2 weeks of no growth.
Right. So if you have seen no growth at all, if we're saying you have some growth to declare it a new month, then that growth.
What we're saying here, we're saying normally. I'm sorry.
You need to have seen some growth to declare it Aviv.
No. What we're saying is the other way around. That the Gemara's question is things do grow in Adar. Says Gemara, that's not what we're talking about. In the Gemara's question, we want a month which is completely not just part.
But if on the 1st of Adar, nothing has grown.
Yes.
So nothing's grown on the 1st of Adar, but it has grown it starts growing on the 26th of Adar, but on the 1st of Adar, you don't know.
Right. So that's fine. So then you'll have so Nisan will be the month when everything will be growing or ripening.
Everything will be, but the start of the growing, until you've seen the start of the growing, you don't know when the growing season has been. And therefore, in practical terms, you can only start a new year, and you can only say this is a new year when the growing has already started a little bit. Otherwise, it may be 1 day away, it might be 35 days away. So
that doesn't matter. Absolutely. So in Adar, you're watching out for things. When you see things start to grow, whenever that starts, then you know you're onto a good thing, and therefore the next month is quite not like we listen. If, however, nothing's growing at the end, then you'll make an Adar Sheni.
Absolutely, but if nothing is growing at the beginning of Adar,
right?
It could be that something will grow on the 21st of Adar. You can't in hindsight.
That's fine. That's the beginning. That's very good. No, but that's not Rove.
But you can't in hindsight say, so when we're debating on which is the new month, if you say the new month is when things start to grow,
right?
You at the beginning of a month, there's nothing growing. There's
Yes.
something growing on the 26th of the month. On the
You mean
first of
how
the
could the Gemara suggest even that
You
that
can't-
month could be Nisan?
you can't anticipate.
No,
No, you
One minute,
can't anticipate if that's going to be the growing month or not. It might be that it's going to grow on the 26th, the 27th, or 34 days later.
Right.
So you need to have seen some growth to
in
know
order
that,
to what?
in order to know that growth is beginning.
Right, and then what? And then you might call that what? The first month.
So the first month has to be when there's some growth already started. Otherwise, you don't know that there's going to be growth in that
Right.
month.
Okay. Okay. You're right. But what happens if you have a month where things start to grow? Right. And now we're going to call that month Adar. We're going to call that the first month, and that's when Pesach's going to be. Says the Gemara, no, don't call that, even if you start seeing things. And don't forget, you've got different crops. You may have some crops starting to grow in Adar. That might be the first month. You're right, you wouldn't have much time. You've already calling that, and that will be your month of Pesach.
But once you've called it Adar,
No. You're right. It's called Adar, but that will be the first month of the year. So that's when Pesach will be.
right? So
Pesach will be in Adar.
Exactly. So you may see things growing.
Right.
You may see things growing on the 16th of that month.
Right.
You would then say, hang on a second, we've got things growing. This means this is the month of Pesach.
Right.
Well, we've missed Pesach because we've only seen them growing on the 16th.
You're absolutely right. Spot on. So there are two answers. You're right. I hear what you're saying. So you're saying you can't be certain things will start to grow in Adar until you've passed Pesach, maybe.
Yeah,
right?
and therefore
So the
you need
answer
to
to that,
have some growth before you can say, right, now we can move on.
Right. In the question of the Gemara, you're right. So what you'd have to say is this: you'd have to get the experts out to decide what you would be saying then, whether there'd be an extra month still. You'd have to get the experts in your best knowledge you could do and make a decision. And there's a posuk which says, whatever you decide, it's in your hands. Your aim, though, would be to, when it starts and you're expecting some growth this month, it's true, it's all based on expectations. I've got the first of Adar. You'd have to say, I'm expecting that this month, the way things are at the moment with my expertise and with my experts with me too, I'm expecting some beginning of ripening this month. I may be wrong. You'll do the best you can, and that's all you can do.
But then with the system that we have at the moment, that protects us because we say, we expect that in Adar there might be a little bit of ripening.
Yes.
And then in Nisan, we can be sure. We want to be sure that there's ripening. How can we be sure that there's ripening?
Because it started already.
Only because there's already been some start to it.
Yes. But the question was that maybe it will be enough to make the month of Pesach, as long as you can expect at that first or just before, I'm expecting some growth this year. If we get it wrong, we get it wrong. It doesn't matter because we have the power to be able to make Rosh Chodesh or a year whenever we like. But the expectation was in the Hava minute of the Gemara that the month of Adar would be the month of Pesach. What we call Adar would be Pesach. You'd have to take a decision. You'd have to make a decision with your experts. I'm expecting this month for things to start growing. And there must be ways of telling that the beginning is going to happen this month. If you get it wrong, it doesn't matter because it's your call. But you're quite right. We don't have that problem anymore because now we see that Nisan is actually the month of Pesach. But the Gemara is still not happy with this because the Pasuk doesn't say Rov Oviv. The Pasuk says the Pesach should be in Chodesh HaOviv. Maybe the Torah means that at the beginning of that month, just however difficult it is, Anthony, you'd have to have your experts making this decision with the best knowledge they've got, that's going to be the month in which the crops are going to start ripening. That's what the Gemara is saying. Now, of course, that's not true because Nisan is the month of Pesach. But the Gemara is saying, I'm not happy with that proof. I'm not happy that the first month of the year is Nisan. It really should be Adar, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan. Maybe it should be that way. The Torah, just using the word Shoma as Chodesh or Aviv doesn't guarantee, for me, that this means Nisan. The Torah might be referring to what we call Adar as being the first month of the year. It's true, it will be called, you'd have all the kids saying that the months of the year, Adar, Nisan, etc. Adar, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan. Who says? Just because the Torah says Chodesh Aviv, I don't know what the Torah means with Chodesh Aviv. Who says it means the majority of ripening? Maybe it means the beginning of the ripening. Could be.
Norman, I stuck out for a couple of minutes, so I may have missed a point here, but we're trying once and for all to fix a month as Chodesh Aviv, not every year, right? We're fixing it once and for all as being Chodesh Aviv. There's a suffix generally whether Adar does have the beginning or doesn't. Yes, there are some years where the beginning of the ripening is in Adar, some not. One thing you are certain about is that when it comes to Nisan, what we now call Nisan, you will have had ripening, definitely. So there's no suffix whether or not that's Chodesh Aviv. There's a suffix generally. This is not every year you're fixing a month which is going to be Chodesh Aviv. Right, so you need to have a month that you know for certain is going to contain ripening. Ripening will have started, and that will be Nisan, not Adar.
But who says that's what the Torah is referring to when it says Chodesh Aviv? The Torah might be referring to not when you've got certainty, but when you can expect that there will be a beginning of ripening in this month. Maybe that's what Chodesh Aviv means. It's the month where you'd expect the ripening to begin. That's what the Gemara is saying. What everybody's saying here is spot on, but it's still only 98% proof. I am not happy, says the Gemara, because maybe when it writes Chodesh Aviv in the Torah, it means the month that you're expecting this month to start the ripening of the crops. I can't tell you. If the Torah would have said the beginning or the majority of, or for certain, that would be a different thing. But the Torah doesn't say that. It says Chodesh Aviv. Maybe it means, always at Rosh Chodesh, the Rosh Chodesh benching, we're thinking about what's happening during this coming month. Before you get to Nisan, it's, Pesach's on its way. Maybe when you say Chodesh Adar, you think because I'm expecting some ripening this month. And if not, the rabbis would have made another Sheni. But whatever happens, you will count the year from, in other words, that Pesach occurred in Adar. We don't know when Yetzias Mitzrayim was. It's amazing. Actually, Yetzias Mitzrayim, we do not know so far. We do get to a conclusion in the end, you'll be pleased to know, that Nisan was actually the month of Yetzias Mitzrayim. We're saying maybe it was Adar. And maybe that at Rosh Chodesh, as Anthony's point, or everybody's point here, you may not know for sure what's happening in this month, but it's what you expect the ripening to occur this month. That is your month, and that month will be the first month of the year, and that is the month the Torah is referring to when it talks about Yetzias Mitzrayim.
Why can't he just say Halacha l'Moshe Sinai? And it's a tradition that Chodesh Aviv is Nisan.
I know you're very keen on Halacha l'Moshe Sinai. If the Torah actually has a proof from Psukim, of course that will be. You're right. It could put its hand, but even you see, the Gemara can't just say Halacha l'Moshe Sinai unless the Gemara actually believes it is Halacha l'Moshe Sinai. There are certain things which are passed down Halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Tefillin are square. It does not mention anywhere in the Torah that tefillin are square. Maybe they're round. Halacha l'Moshe Sinai, that tefillin are square. There is a fixed amount of things which are halacha l'Moshe Sinai. You can't just because you're in a corner and you're in real trouble. You'd say at the ropes that it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. If it's not one of our fixed list of halacha l'Moshe Sinai, we can't make that up. And that's really what the Gemara is saying. That's very powerful. It's a very good point, because it's very powerful. The Gemara will not just use Halacha l'Moshe Sinai unless the Gemara believes this really is Halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Not waving the wand, Halacha l'Moshe Sinai, unless it really feels it's true. So the Gemara feels here that there must be, it expects there to be a proof, And the Gemara is just asking, what is the proof that the first month of the year is Nisan and not Adar? Don't give me the point about ripening fruits, not actually fruits, it's crops, ripening crops, because that doesn't help me, because it might mean when it's expected for the crops to ripen. That's all. So Gemara will have to look for somewhere else.
Norman.
Back to our Gemara. Yes.
Yeah, Norman, I just want to ask, if we were following a sun year, then we wouldn't have this problem.
Correct.
All right.
But we're not.
So
The fact, you're right.
The fact that in the first year,
You're absolutely
the fact
right.
that in the first year we're losing 10 days, and in the second year we're losing another 10 days, that's 20 days.
Yes.
And it's made up in the third year, must
Yes.
mean that we cannot rely on this ripened on this argument.
No, because it's up to the rabbis to decide when they want to make that extra month to make sure it's going to be in line. We do want to have the month of Pesach to be in the spring. That is true. It is Chodesh Ha'aviv. In the end, it actually does mean the majority of, but we haven't proved it yet. But you're right. That's why it's so important. It's in our hands to decide when are we going to have that extra month? You're right. If it will be a solar year, this whole thing wouldn't apply. We know when the spring is. If it's March, it's March. March is March. You can't change. There's some years which are, wetter or earlier, but, some sunnier. But it's not. We've got to lose.
But Sammy's point is a mathematical one. I mean, if it takes, we need to catch up every 3 years. There's no room for the seasons being slightly up this year by coincidence, and therefore we're going to lose 10 days. I mean, you've got to catch up.
No. Yeah, yes, of course you're right. It's mathematical. But when the Torah says that Pesach should be in Chodesh Ha'aviv, does it mean it wants you to try and ensure that it's in Adar, what we call Adar, or in Nisan? What did the Torah want? And in fact, it's saying that that's when Yetzias Mitzrayim happened. It happened in a month of Aviv. What does the Torah mean? Well, this is what we call Adar, and therefore the months begin in Adar. And therefore, Rosh Hashanah is going to be that month, 1 month earlier, because it's the 7th month of the year. But if everything begins in Adar, actually you'd end up with Rosh Hashanah being in Elul. Yeah? What does the Torah want? And yes, we do know the answer, but the Gemara said, can you prove this, please? I want a proof for this. You can imagine somebody asking the question, what is the proof that the Torah wants? And the Torah does not say Nisan, and we know what Nisan is. The Torah said the first month. Well, the first, it depends where you start. You can sign Nisan, you can sign Adar, you can sign Iyar. Gemara wanted Iyar, threw it out. Yes, Robert.
Yes. So I've got a question. The leap years were in a set order, 332, 3332. So if that's the case.
No, they're not. They're not. Only now we've got a calendar.
Oh, okay.
We know, ultimately, it's all got to tie in eventually, but in the olden days, it was not 338.
Right.
Now, as I say, the people in the business of selling calendars, not too many of them around because they didn't know where they were. In fact, you couldn't even tell next month. You were arranging a birthday party, or on the first day. Let's say you're in the Hebrew calendar. Your Hebrew birthday for your 60th birthday was going to be on Tammuz, the 2nd of Tammuz. You can't tell when that's going to be. Depends how many days Sivan is going to have. It's all over the place. It was totally in the hands of the Bezdin to decide the months and the years, how long they would be. But we are focusing, and you're quite right, Sam, that of course it's mathematical, and you know how everything's going to, you're out by so many days and going to bring it back in line. But the question is, what does the Torah mean when it says Chodesh Ha'aviv? And we know the Posuk's called that the first month. I don't know which month I'm talking about. Says the Gemara, moving on swiftly. Says the Gemara, Omar Rav Chisda, Elo Omar Rav Chisda. There's another proof. Mehocha. And you'll see how this is going to move once we go into it. Let's look at now, rather than at Pesach, let's move along, not to Shavuos, but to Sukkot. And there the Pasuk says, Ach, this pasuk in Vayikra, in Emor, Ach b'chamisha osa l'chidesh hashvi, the 15th of the 7th month, right? Ba'osmechem, when you gather, as tevuas ha'oretz, which means this is at the end of the summer, when you gather the crops and you bring them into the house. Says the Gemara, Eizehu chodesh, which is that month? Sheyesh by asifa. Which is that month? Have a look at Rashi. Sheyesh by asifa she'machnisin by, this word asifa. Le'esov is to gather together. Says Rashi, she'machnisin by Paris labayis, into the house, storehouses. Mipnei agshavim, because you're now getting close to the winter season. B'chol hakayitz, the whole summer, hein asuyas gadishin liyabish. What's a godish?
A pile,
Yeah,
a heap.
Yeah, we talk about a haystack. Yeah,
Pile.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, quite right. A pile, a godish. They make a godish liyabish. So they're out in the summer months. They're out in the fields drying, and then you bring the crops in. Always in the month of, says the Gemara, Ezu Chodesh, hope you got that word, beginning of the line, Sheyesh Bo Asifa, Habi Omezet Tishri, the Kokori Le Shavi, that's called the 7th month. Brilliant. So if that's the 7th month, we know the order now, listen here, 7 Tammuz, right? But, okay, are you happy with that? So therefore, the Gemara is saying here, if Tishri is the month that you bring the crops in, then we now go back from 7 back to 1. We know that our Nisan is the 1st month of the year. Says the Gemara, no, it's not true. Back to the same argument as we gave before. Va'ema Mar Cheshvan.
Oh.
Maybe Mar Cheshvan. Sometimes you leave things a little bit later. You feel it's a very hot summer, and therefore you are bringing some crops into the house in Mar Cheshvan. In which case, what will be the 1st month of the year? Umay Shvi, therefore Shvi will be the 7th month going from Iyar. With me? Do you understand? The Gemara suggested that Sukkot is in the 7th month. Right? And we know the 7th month is the month that you bring the crops into the house. Right? Says the Gemara, when do you do that? You do that in Tishri. Brilliant. If that's the 7th month, the 1st month is Nisan. Says, well, no. You sometimes bring your crops into the house in Chodesh Cheshvan, in which case Iyar will be the 1st month. Says the Gemara, the same argument as before, Bo'ilo Osif, Veleka. That's not really a Zman of Osif where you're bringing most of the crops in. You might sometimes occasionally bring in some of the crops later on in Cheshvan, but you don't always do that. That's not that the majority, of course, is still done in Tishrei. Says the Gemara, okay, what about this? Va'ema Elul. Maybe it's Elul, because Umay Shvi will be Adar, because some of the crops you might feel, and there are some people who start early, in the end of Elul, midway through Elul, they're already starting to bring the crops into the house. So when it says it's got to be, it says ba'osbechem, when you gather. Maybe the Torah, when it says ba'osbechem, it means when you start to gather. With me? Says the Gemara, the answer we've seen before, no. We want roiv osif veleka. When the majority of the crops are being brought into the house, and that will be in Chodesh Tishri, that is the 7th month, and that's when Sukkot will be. Says Gemara, no. Midi roiv osif kasiv. The Torah, when it says that Sukkot should be in the month where you bring the crops in, it doesn't say when you bring most of the crops in. Maybe it means the beginning, when you start to bring the crops in, or maybe it means when you finish bringing the crops in. So that could either be Elul or it could be Cheshvan. Do you understand? When the Torah, we want clarity here, and we're trying to be certain that the 7th month of the year is Tishri. Says the Gemara, you can't learn that from the word ospechem, because when you gather, the Torah might mean when you start to gather, when you finish gathering. Who says it means when you bring the bulk of your gathering into the house? I can't tell from the word ospechem. Says the Gemara, you're right. You may have a 99% proof, 98% proof, but it's not watertight. Ella Omar Ravina. We'll stop with this. Very interesting. We do not learn that Nisan is the first month from the Torah. Wow. Midivrei Kabbalah, we'll see next week a few more answers, a few more psukim round Nach on this. We learn this from Nach. And here we have a posuk which comes from Zechariah. People may be familiar with the book of Zechariah, one of the, they're called the minor prophets, minor only because they're shorter. And this is Zechariah. In fact, it's the Haftarah for next week, comes from Zechariah. In the time, actually, of the Churban, just after the first Churban, when they were going back to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash, and he was warning them that they really should take this much more seriously, going back to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. A lot of very esoteric comments in Zechariah, which are very difficult to understand. But one thing he does say, he says, but in that book, in the book of Zechariah, it says, B'yom esrim va'abor la'ashtei osa chodesh, of the 11th month, and that was Chodesh Shabbat. It's calling Shabbat, and it's very clear. Shabbat, everybody knew what Shabbat meant, and Shabbat is called the 11th month. If Shabbat is called the 11th month, we know Nisan is there for the first month. And that's where we learn it from, and there'll be various other proofs. But it's interesting, the Torah itself does not specify, it just says the first month, the 7th month, and it does not tell me which month that is, where you're starting. But we do know if Shabbat, and we know what Shabbat is called the 11th month, then going back from 11 back to 1, that will take you to Nisan. So we now have a proof that Nisan is the first of the month, and that's proving what we set out when we said Be'echad B'Nisan Rosh Hashanah Chadoshim. Nisan is the first month. We therefore know that if Nisan is the first month, the 7th month will be in Tishri, and therefore we've got all that sorted. And for today, we will stop there. Good to see everybody.
If we had that as Kabbalah, why did the Gemara go into the whole debate? If it is a Kabbalah, it is a fact from the Nevi'im. What's the point of the debate that we just had?
Good call, good point. If you can find something in the Torah itself, it's worth a lot more. A proof in the Torah, we always find that Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim, Torah has the greatest of lessons. If we can have a lesson from the Torah, we'll try and pick it up. It's true, if we haven't got it, we'll go to Nevi'im, because it's still Nevi'us. But the Torah is stronger still. So if we can, we try our best to focus on the Torah. If we can't do it, we're forced to go back to Nevi'im. We do have Kabbalah. It's called Kabbalah because they received Nevuah. That's why it's called Nevuah. Rashi says that. They received Nevuah. So therefore, it's second best, but it's still pretty good. And that's good enough for us, and therefore that's where we learned it from. And we've got a question from David.
Yeah, I just wanted to report a footnote from Art Scroll. It says, usually the term Divrei Kabbalah refers to books of the prophets. However, the book of Esther, which is part of the writings, is also called Divrei Kabbalah in this context.
Yes.
So the writings is Kesuvim.
Normally Kabbalah. Well, you're jumping a little bit. That's for next week. And I tell you why. Because at this point we've only brought a posuk from the Nevi'im, so we're okay. But you are absolutely right. We will. The next proof. You're quite right. The very next posuk, we're going to bring another proof from Megillas Esther. And normally you do not. No, good point, good call. We will be bringing proofs, further proofs from the Megillas Esther. And Megillas Esther is not normally called Divrei Kabbalah. It's called Divrei, we would talk the Ksuvim. Tillim as well, it's not called Divrei Kabbalah. Normally the Kabbalah were things that received where they were giving out, either talking about the future or they were giving comments to the people of the time to be able to do things, which was a nevuah, which is Kabbalah, and that would normally focus. Therefore, if you're right, the words the posuk we found in Zechariah fits this. But in fact, you're quite right in this instance, where the Gemara uses Kabbalah, it means everything which was sheep, including Megillah Esther as well, which we'll find out, I'll say next time, all being well. So with that, gentlemen.
Megillah Esther has, of course, Adar. It mentions
Adar.
Adar.
Very good. Yeah, very good. Absolutely, the Gemara will go there.
Can I just say something?
That actually answers another question, actually, for David, that Simon's point, that we go first to Torah, we then go to Nevi'im, and then we come down to Ksuvim. So you're right. As Simon mentioned, of course, we do have the word Adar mentioned. And of course, he mentions Adar being the 12th month, so it's another good proof. You're quite right. That example you mentioned, Simon, will be mentioned a few lines to go. So well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do hope everybody's well.
Yeah, listen.
Question.
Malcolm's got a question.
Can I make a very quick question?
It can be a slow question, if you like.
Slow question. Well, it's not really a question. It's more like a comment, because I find what's really interesting about the discussion is that they're trying to fix the name of the month. But what's clear
No.
Well,
the names of the months of Nisan, Iyar, Siv, and Tammuz were names that they had in Persia. We mentioned this earlier, and they were brought with us. The question is, of those names, Nisan, is that number one? Or is Iyar number one? Or is Tishri number one? Which is number one?
No, but what I'm saying is that it's interesting that because it's not mentioned, they're trying to fix it so that it is mentioned. But since it isn't mentioned in the Torah, that there must be a level of, wouldn't there be a level of commentary which would say that it's sort of not deliberately unclear, but it's the concept of fixing the month is not necessarily what the concept of the text is trying to get to. It's trying to get to the essence is about that it has to happen in Aviv, and these other things happen to. So it's the concept is very much connected to the process of gathering, let's say, or of plant harvesting, and that the things that happen in those months are connected to those processes. In other words, the spiritual.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it seems that
yes, absolutely. You'll find that Pesach is linked very much to this process of, you talk about the bikur, the ripening of the crops. You talk about Sukkot being very much linked to Ba'ospechem. What we're focusing in, which exact month is the Torah talking about? Now, it may well be clear, and let's say we wanted to be the first month in Nisan because that was Yetzias Mitzrayim, but was it Nisan? Was Yetzias Mitzrayim actually Nisan? You're quite right. It focuses on, rather than actual what month it was linked to this bikur. And this whole idea, you're absolutely right. When you talk about Pesach, it's meant to be a renewal, and a renewal not just for the crops, meant to be a renewal for the individuals too. And that's exactly how we go through the months of the year. We have, or the Yom Tovim, when we have Shavuos. It's a renewal of the Kabbalah Satorah. Or if you talk about Sukkot, you're talking about bringing the crops in, what we've gleaned throughout the year as we join now the winter months, taking things with us spiritually as well, taking things with us into the winter months. So you're quite right, the Torah is very much focusing on the renewal of Pesach, the bringing in, the harvesting of Sukkot, bringing in harvesting for ourselves, taking things as we move on. What we do need to clarify, and that's what this Gemara is about, exactly which month we're talking about. But yeah, it's a good point.
Okay.
The Babylonian names of the months, of course, are rather haphazard. I mean, Tammuz is the fertility god, I think, the name of the fertility god in Babylonia. So these names are of no Jewish significance.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, that's right. That's what the Ramban said. They're only taken with us because those were the names they used there. And to remind us, there was a time we were actually in Bovel. We came out of Bovel. So you're right. And that's from now on we called Nisan, and Nisan Iyar Siv. And I say in the time of the Ramban, I don't know whether anybody got any Persian friends that they can ask whether these months are still used in Persia. I don't know. But in the time of the Ramban, they clearly were. But you're right. That's where the name